Today, off the back of what Gary has said, Mike has been talking about, I'm going to run through some, hopefully will be practical stuff, thinking about youth ministry. I think some of the stuff you guys may have already thought through a lot of it, but I hope that as we head through here, it might be encouraging to you, think through why we do what we do. Because the reality is as Mike stated, what we actually do often is we default to what we had happen to us. And so whether that's when we're in a ministry and how that ministry happened for us, or whether we have become a youth leader and our experience of the first youth ministry we've been a part of, then that's what we default to. Now, that's all well and good if it's done well, but the problem is if we've come up through a ministry that isn't done so well, our why we do what we do may not have been thought through. And then hopefully as we go along, we'll have some practical tips and whatever, and I hope that we'll have some interaction with each other as we head through. But as I start, can we pray and ask God to be in this conversation? Oh Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity to connect with these guys and girls across Australia. And I pray, Lord, as we think through connecting with young people and what our ministries look like, I pray, Lord, that you might help us to have good conversation, to be hearing the things that we need to hear so that we might be able to be all that you've called us to be. Lord, we're so grateful that you allow us to be a part of youth ministry. It's such a privilege. You don't need us to do it, and yet you use people like us with all our faults and things that aren't so good, but you gift us, Lord, and you want us to use those gifts to bring glory to you. And so help us, Lord, to hone the skills that you have given to us and the abilities you've given to us that we might be effective in what we do. For Jesus' sake, amen. I am going to just start by just telling my story as an example. I have been in youth ministry now for 33 years. So I started as a 17-year-old. And then I've been in full-time ministry for the Presbyterian Church in Queensland for 20 years, basically doing youth, children's and young adult. My favourite age group probably is that year 10 to 12, but, year 7, 8 boys is like taming brumbies, and I could never lead a year 9 girls group. That would kill me. I have no idea what they're talking most of the time. But over all those years, I feel like I've probably learnt less. When you're 16, you know everything. And as you get older, you know less and less. That's exactly how I feel with youth ministry. But there's no doubt that God has taught me his way is always the best way to go. And there's definitely been some things on the way through that I've learned. So I grew up in a country town. Bell was the name of that in Queensland. When my brothers went through that youth group, there was 40 kids in it. By the time I got there was 5 kids. 2 of them were my sisters. One was a girl that I thought she was crazy, and then a guy that I kind of got on with. And our leader would often, we'd play some games. We would then do a Bible study. But through the whole period of time that I was in that youth group, my leader never asked me once whether I was a Christian or not. He certainly taught the Bible, but I wouldn't say that he knew me very well at all. And at the end of the day, I didn't become a Christian in youth group. I got a lot of knowledge, but it did never reach my heart. After I left school, God really convicted me and I became a Christian. And in that same church, the minister at the time said, well, you're a young guy, just like there were some other young guys here before. You should do youth ministry. And so I did youth ministry, and I just did it better than the other leader. I ran better games. It was, I tried to make it more cool. Well, the reality is in that little country town, there were 40 kids in it in the high school. And I had 35 of them come to youth group. Now, great percentage. Now, I got married, and my wife and I had to leave that area for work. And when I left, within a year after I left, that ministry had died. I look back at that, and I only know of 3 kids that went on in their faith. And I can't even take credit for that because they were in a Christian home. Yeah. So there's two examples of the ministries that I was involved with. We went to a town not very far away from Bell, but down the road, the church called Dolby Presbyterian. At the time, I got involved in youth ministry, and they were looking for a youth pastor, and a guy came there and he sat down with me and the other guy that was looking after the youth group and said, what do you think we need to do? And our answer was, we don't know, but you need to get a new bit of paper and start again, because what we're doing just doesn't seem to be working. We had heaps of kids, but no one was going on in their faith. And so he changed the model dramatically from just fun and games and discipleship to a much more relational model where we had a small group that we discipled those kids in that small group. We actually took Christian kids and built them up, and they reached out to their friends and invited people into the ministry, and radically changed how I thought through youth ministry. Now we'll talk about that in a bit more, but like when we think about youth ministry, we often, if I was to ask you, if we were to have a conversation about youth ministry, I reckon within the first 5 questions that any of us would have to gauge how youth ministry would go, what would be that question that we'd all want to know? Isn't it, how big is your youth group? And so we often gauge youth ministry. We'd like to think, oh no, we don't do that, but we often gauge how many are in our youth group. And so that last youth ministry I was involved with, I started with 6 kids in my first group, and it grew to 16 with 2 leaders, and all 16 of them went on in their faith. The second group I started with 6, and it ended with 9 guys, and 8 of those guys have gone on in their faith, all involved in the church somewhere. Now, if I was to ask you, what is a successful ministry and why is it, what would your answer be to that? So if we weren't on Zoom, I'd get you to talk to each other right now, but right now we're not. So you have to unmute yourself and just give us what you're thinking. And I've been listening in, and Anna, you're definitely going to talk to me.
You want real faith that lasts. That's a successful
Real faith that lasts, okay. Yep. Anyone else? Successful ministry. Brian?
Yeah, look, growing in number is one of those tangible things.
Yep.
But I think for me, it's when you're able to look back and see the impact of what you've been a part of. Seeing how that has unfolded over time.
Yeah, okay. Tom, you're a young guy. What do you reckon the success of youth ministry is? Successful
one where the youth feel comfortable and safe and able to talk about anything with their leaders.
Yeah, okay, great. Paul, have you got anything to add?
Sorry, did you say me?
Yep, Paul.
No, nothing to add at this point. Okay. Thanks.
So all of those things are true, aren't they? So you want kids to go on in their faith. You want kids, like numbers have to be in there. Like at one level, yet you would still say, if my youth group isn't growing in number, people aren't coming to know Christ, is there something I should be doing different? That's true, isn't it? Now, but I do want to say this. What happens if you've got a youth group that you're faithfully building relationships with kids, you're teaching the Bible in those relationships, you're applying the Bible in the relationships, and it never grows? Is that a successful youth ministry? Yes or no? You can nod your head or shake it. It's
depends how you define success, isn't it?
Yeah, if you're still there, you're still going, and you haven't given up, and you're still prayerful, then God can do what he wants.
Yep.
There's fruitfulness and faithfulness.
Yep.
At the same time, if kids aren't wanting to invite their friends or share the gospel with their friends or whatever, like that's a sign that the kids maybe haven't quite fully got the gospel yet either.
Yeah. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I've done training for a long time, and an older leader said to me, Dave, don't forget about the prophets. They preached God's word faithfully. They did exactly what God had asked them. And many times nobody turned to Jesus. And so I'm saying that because Mike actually brought it up too. This is that sense of freedom we have in Christ. Our role is to faithfully teach, build relationships, love people as Christ has loved us. And as we do that, if people don't respond, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop and think about what we're doing. But it doesn't also mean that we're the ones, God is the one who opens people's eyes, and we need to faithfully continue to speak into that space. So when we talk about success, we need to be careful that what we're actually trying to do is actually build those relationships, teach the Bible in those relationships, and apply them to kids. Okay. Now, when I came into youth ministry full-time 20 years ago, this was across Australia, but I obviously was in Queensland, and we didn't have very many youth kids at all in our state, okay? It was pretty much a desert. And I actually decided I'm going to go and interview all the oldies that are still alive to find out what youth ministry was like. Now, this is 20 years ago, so a lot of the people that I interviewed, they are no longer alive, and so you can take this bit of information with as much or at least as you want. But I'm going to tell a story because for me it changed my thinking dramatically. So I don't know if you can see up on the back here, but I drew a little thing, and you see the graph there. I'll get this right yet. There's the one side is how many kids were in youth group, down the bottom is when it was. And so if I drew the graph, like in the 1920s, it would seem that youth groups had somewhere between 50 and 60 kids, lots of young people in ministry. It starts to decline, and then there's a little peak in the 50s. Now, what would that be? Anyone got any idea what the peak in the 50s might be?
Billy Graham?
Yeah, it's Billy Graham. Unbelievable. He actually made a difference in youth ministry big time. But as we come into the 60s and 70s and then 80s, in the 80s, it bottoms out. And basically, the average youth group in every denomination across the whole of Australia was 6 kids. Now, when I came into ministry in 2002 full time, I went and thought, well, maybe we've been doing youth ministry a long time now. What is it now? And it was 6. In the Presbyterian Church in Queensland, our average was 5.5. We were even below the average. And so that led me to think, well, what was happening back then? And as I spoke to, and Mike brought this up too in this thing, talking to parents, as I spoke to people in different generations, the further I went back to the oldies, where the youth groups were a lot larger, their response, like what was youth group doing? They were saying, they would say things like, I love Jesus because he loves me and I want to love other people that way. And then the next generation, the youth group, kids, there was still a fair few kids in there, but they would say, it's what you did. We go to youth group because that's what you do. And by the time we reach the 80s, it's a little bit like we've had sex, drugs, rock and roll, and they're far more exciting than it's what you do. And it just bottomed out. People just pulled out because I'm not going to do because I have to do it. I don't have to do it. And they'd lost this sense of, I love Jesus because he loves me and I want to love other people. The other thing that blew me away is when I pulled out, you ready for this? I pulled out the Presbyterian Fellowship of Australia's handbook from 1920. It had 4 things in it. It had that we need to do Bible study. We need to hear from God. We need to do Bible study. It had recreation. And as you read recreation, it wasn't just about going out and have fun. It was a little bit like what you guys were talking about. It was going out, build relationships with each other, build good, strong relationships with each other. And then the third one was service, that we actually take God's word and we're going to put it into action and serve. And then worship. We are a part of God's family. How do we fit in that? And we want to worship together. And when I looked at that, I went, have we just forgotten what we're meant to be doing? Rather than reinventing the wheel, we actually made a decision that maybe we need to actually just remember rather than try to, maybe we're not going to have to find something new. But at the time, and I'll do this now too, that just so we can get clear, and some of you guys will relate to this, I'm going to do some models of youth ministry that were out there then. So this is a little bit like the first youth group I had. There was no doubt that God was involved, and the leader that was there, I have no doubt was a Christian, and then that leader would come in and teach the Bible to some kids. In my youth group, there was 5 kids. But relationally, that leader didn't have a lot to do. They just came in and taught, very much a teacher model, and the leader really didn't know the kids super well to be able to apply the Bible, but good knowledge is happening. So this model often happens in children's ministry, in Sunday schools, but in youth ministry, this was quite rampant in the Presbyterian Church in Queensland. And so what's the problem with that? Like, the Bible's being taught, that's a good thing, but it hasn't grown anything. In fact, things have climbed. What's the problem, do you think?
It's strictly teacher, like it's like teacher-student relationship. Like it's purely, it's like a class, but there's no like real relationships being formed or connections being made, I think is the idea that I got from your model.
Yeah, so what's missing there? It's relationship, isn't it? We all know that to be true. Like, if you think about the teacher that you loved the most at school and the teacher that you hated the most, well, it's being recorded, isn't it? I'm old enough, hopefully my teacher's done alive. But Dottie was the English teacher. She did not care about me at all. And I did terribly at English. She left for a period of time and I went from a C- to an A. And I kind of wish she'd stayed away. But my maths teacher, he actually took the time to get to know me and care about me and get to know my problems, why I didn't understand it. And I had good grades and I did well in that class. So relationship, this just becomes boring Bible study, because although the truth is being taught, it can never get applied to individuals in the group, because you don't know where they're at. And I wasn't even a Christian in youth group. And so I was being treated as if I was a Christian, and I didn't even have a relationship with Jesus.
Sorry, I just got a question.
Yeah.
Does it assume that the arrow going down from the leader to the youth is, does it assume that it can't go the other way, that model too? So like the youth actually inputting into us as leaders, and that dynamic of relationship where we learn from them as much as them being taught by us? Like, does it miss something there by just being direct from the leader and that's it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think as we head along and look at where we ended up with having a type of model, I think you'll see that yes, it's a two-way street there. We want people to know each other, and it's got to go both ways. This one here is the one that I feel like has influenced Australia the most. This is what I was being taught in the late 80s, 90s, and it's the 3-ring model. So I hope you can see this, but basically you run an event, and then you get kids there and you go, oh, this is great, kids are there, and you have this big event, and then you share the gospel, and you hope then that they'll come to youth group. And back when they were doing, we were talking about 50-50. So, which is 50% having fun, playing games, and 50% Bible study. The reality is it was probably 80-20, or in some cases 90-20. And then hopefully as they're doing the studies, they'll become Christians and will end up here as the core group. They'll end up as the core, and then the core will go back out here and run the events. So you're drawing people into the core. Now, that had been run from the 80s through to 2002 and made no significant difference to the growth in youth ministry at all. What do you reckon was, because I've seen this successfully run, but what do you think might be the issue with this? Now, I'm doing this because we need to think through why we're doing what we're doing. Because we can... Yep, go.
Sorry, is it the fact that you're not starting with the core and building from there in terms of like culture and whatever? You're starting with the big thing, and then your core is like the last thing, and So the wrong way round.
So, why are people coming? Why are you? What is the thing that is drawing people in there?
The event.
Now, no offense to anybody, but the Bible tells us pretty clearly that the power is in the gospel. And yet somewhere in the 80s, we decided that the event was more important than the gospel. And we forgot that no matter what event we do in youth ministry, as our kids grow up, I'll break this to you gently, sex, drugs and rock and roll will win in the end with the event. Now, that mightn't be, for younger guys, that mightn't be what we're talking about now, but ultimately, that's the event is what's drawing people in. And, well, to be honest, sometimes it can be quite... I'm going quickly here because I think I've got an hour to do this, okay? So just jump in and ask questions anytime you like. Because in churches around me, they were doing what was called the funnel model, that, you run an event, get lots of people there. In the event, they all get there, you share the gospel, and hopefully at the bottom, there's some Christians, and we do a follow-up with the Christians and plug them into youth groups. Anyone seen that model? You know what I'm talking about? In Townsville, we had this big circus thing come through. I can't even remember what it was called, but they asked all the churches to put money into us, $200,000 to have them there. And I was a youth pastor at the time, and I said, I don't think it's worthwhile. I went to RE, or RI, or whatever you guys call it down there, religious instruction, education. I had a non-Christian kid come up to me and say to me, you Christians are a bunch of con artists. And I went, oh, heck, what's going on here? He said, we went along to this World Expo circus thing you had on. My dad was disgusted that you started preaching the gospel at him. And in all the advertising, it talked about it, but just said the only thing Christian in there was supported by combined churches. And then I had a bunch of kids in my youth group that I had to follow up on who I already knew that they were Christians. And I said to them, what the heck, what's going on here? You went up the front. And they said, oh, not many people coming up. We thought we might give them a hand. And so even in that gave a bad thing, because they told me 700 people became Christians. And out of my youth group of 70, I think 15 of my kids went up the front. And then I knew that they were Christians. But the reason I'm doing this, and if you're doing this type of model, I'm joking around here, and I don't mean to offend, but we've missed the point that the powerful thing, the thing that we want people to hear is the gospel. We need to be unashamedly Christian. The other one that is around, and you guys might have it much more in Pentecostal churches, I'll just draw it like this. We had a church down the corner called Calvary, and they would do a rock and roll show. It was Christian, unashamedly Christian, smoke machines, the whole show. The gospel was definitely taught, the Bible was preached, but it was rock concert style. For a small youth group that we started out with a few kids, that was not something that we were going to pull off. But again, what is the problem with that is what? It's relationship, isn't it? If kids become Christians or want to know more about, there's no feeder there to actually sort that out. And so when we sat down, I went, okay, let's think about a model of ministry. This is what we came up with, right or wrong. So you can chuck this out the window, but this is what Queensland did. So I'll draw this first. If we talk about this as the whole youth group, okay? Within the youth group, we knew that we needed to have relationships, key relationships. And so we had small groups within depending on how much there were. Now, in some of our youth groups, this wasn't the youth group, just one of these was. So the first youth group I had 5 kids in it. And so within, if I just take one of those circles, small groups, you would have a leader there. And that leader's role was to teach the Bible, get to know the kids, to teach the Bible in to those kids, but apply it as well. And so let's just put some kids in here. It's not good. I'm old, so I call them kids, and you can't have KKK. That's not good. So leaders building relationships with the kids. But just like who said that to me before? It was Tim. Tim said, not only that, you want the kids building relationship with the leader so that they get to know each other, they know where they're at. But not only that, the leader should be encouraging kids to get to know each other. Okay, now in most cases, we didn't look at anybody outside the church, only the kids that were in the church. God had given us those teenagers in our church. Stop worrying about who's not a Christian right now. Start loving the ones that are in the church. And so in some places there were 2 kids and we put a leader there. Some places there was 10, 15 and we put them into groups, okay? But what we were trying to do here is to actually create a little snapshot of what it would be like to be in heaven. That people got on with each other. We were hearing from God and praying to God. And as we did that, we were building relationships with each other. And so what happened here then is as the leader got to know the kids, let's just say we're doing a study on how big God's love is. And Bob over here, he's not a Christian. And the leader knows that Bob's not a Christian. And so at the end of the Bible study, we would go, so what did you get out of the study? And Bob would go, oh, that God is a big, loving God. Good job, Bob. What are you going to do about that? At that point, most kids fall down, have no idea what to say. But because the leader knows Bob, he goes, Bob, doesn't that mean that if God's a big, loving God, that he's loved you, that Jesus has died on the cross for you, that maybe you should do something about that? Bob goes, yeah, I guess I should. And the next question that was asked is, what are you going to do about that? Or how are you going to do it? Again, kids won't know that. But because the leader's got a relationship with Bob, the leader would say to Bob, why don't you go home this week and think about what's stopping you from becoming a Christian? And we'll talk about that next week. Whereas Jim round here, he's at school. He's struggling at school just to be a Christian. And he said, what did you learn today? I learned that God's a big, loving God. What are you going to do about that? Don't have any idea. Leader says to what did I give your name? Jim, whatever. Jim. He says, what are you going to do about that? Jim goes, I have no idea. And he goes, well, at school, we're talking about you struggling with actually living that out. If God loves you so much and you had to put those two, God and your friends, together, who are you going to trust the most here? The dude who sends Jesus or your friends? And, oh, yeah, I guess that's right. What are you going to do about that? Again, you just need to help. The leader can then prompt to go, you need to actually back God and love him rather than running after your friends. Now, the reason I'm saying this, when you do that, suddenly the Bible comes alive to kids. It isn't just God speaking a truth, it's speaking a truth into them. Does that make sense? Now, as you go along, it's not just teaching the Bible, it's trying to get these kids to get on as well. And so I remember a girls group, 11 girls group, 3 girls in the group, they hated each other, hated each other. And the leader the whole time just spent trying to get them to have good relationships. They teach the Bible into those relationships. They were helping them. Those 3 girls now are best friends. All 3 of them went into full-time ministry. And I look back at that. Jenny was the leader's name. I think, how tough was that gig? And yet the amount of people who have become Christians because Jenny took the time to build that relationship between those girls, I wouldn't be able to probably count them now. And so you're wanting to help these guys, not just to learn the Bible, but to live. And so in this, you'll be teaching them how to share the gospel. And so this is Fred. Fred goes out, and this group is praying for their non-Christian friends out there that they get opportunity to share it. Here's friend out here. The friend goes, what did you do today? What did you do this weekend? Oh, I went to youth group. Oh, what's youth group about? Well, let me tell you, it's about Jesus, blah, 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 blah. And would you like to come along? Friend goes, yeah, Yeah, I would. So friend shows up in here. Now, you guys are probably sitting there, some of you thinking, that is impossible. I want to tell you, I've seen this happen hundreds of times. And so friend arrives back in there. What does this leader know about friend? Why is friend there? Friend is there because this Fred has invited him to hear about Jesus. And so, yes, they might muck around and do some fun stuff relationally together, but when they arrive at the Bible study, leader treats friend just like everybody else and teaches the Bible. Now, my experience in that is that at the end of the study, I say to, we're having something to eat, and I say to friend here, so what, have you had anything to do with youth group or church or anything? This is a broad brush stroke of the conversations I've had with lots of kids. And they go, no, never. And I said, well, what'd you think about it? And more often than not, they will say, you guys love each other and you care about me and I'm going to come back. So they come back because of the relationship, not about Jesus, but after a while they work out the relationship's there because of Jesus. And then friend. Now, when we changed to this type of model in Queensland, I'm old. I stopped having to invite, get out there and be cool at a skate park and invite kids along. The kids did it. And so we often talk about where do kids or youth fit into the church? Right here. When you actually take Christian kids and treat them like Christian kids or point them to Jesus, they are a force to be reckoned with. And so they're a resource within our church that we often don't even think about. And it's to our detriment. We wonder why young people aren't there. Well, that's partly because we don't see the leadership potential that is in them just being Christians. In fact, as we've gone along, youth groups have shown up older, like in Dalby, when we started these small groups, the church had 3 small groups in the whole of the church. These kids grew up, came young adults. Young adults came out and went, hey, there's no small groups out here. And about 6 years after we started and kids flowing through, 80% of the church was in small groups meeting together. The youth group actually changed the church. So, man, I gave you a download there, didn't I? Is everyone still alive?
Yep.
I have
with you.
Well, like I think Brian said, I've got this deal that I'm getting old, and what has happened in Queensland now, we don't have to convince everybody of this. What has happened is complacency has kicked in here, that we talk about you need to build relationships with the kids, apply the Bible in those, teach the Bible in those relationships and apply the Bible. It becomes like a 3-step process and the relationship is disappearing. And so we have to continue to remind ourselves of this. Otherwise, it just we always default to process or program because you're in control of that. This here, I can tell you now, Year 9 girls group, you're never in control of it. Never. And Year 7 boys, it's like breaking in Brumbies. Unless you've got a children's ministry that's doing the same thing, you have to break them in for the first year. So, okay. Is everyone okay with that? Another thing we did was we actually said, well, let's rethink, how do we reach young people? Actually, I'll just leave that up there. So, Andrew, have you got your Bible with you? Yep. Can you look up 1 Peter 2:12? I'm just going to ask a few. Anna, can you look up Psalms 133 for me? There's lots of Andrews here. Andrew, Tasmania. Can you look up Colossians 4, 5 and 6? Phil Burns. Can you look up Ephesians 4, 11 and 12? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to actually just read out your verse twice, or the passage twice, and I want us to try and answer this question. How can we reach young people today? Okay? How can we actually reach young people today? Remembering that the Bible does not talk about youth at all, really. Youth as we see it, teenage youth, that says nothing about them. They're either adults or they're children. But we do have this demographic now because of high school that we do need to think through. So, Andrew, can you start, please?
So 1 Peter 2:12, right?
That's it.
Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of his visitation.
Yep, just read that again.
I'll say it again.
Yep.
Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation.
Yep. So how do you think that verse might relate to us reaching young people today?
Dave, one of the well, yes, we should live well. We don't want to be like the World Expo thing that you mentioned earlier, where it was promoted as one thing and then something else was slipped in, and the difficulty of that. I think one of the issues that we do have in our time is as teenagers are disconnected from the church and have no connection, therefore, to Christian people much. If they have any understanding of what a church is, it's what they pick up through the media, at any level of media, and there's not a lot of positive stuff that's not coming from churches themselves.
Yep. So I think the challenge here is for us, we're not in control of media. Here that I've just spoken about, those kids that you've got in there, that's where you need to start heading.
Yep.
Let me tell you a story. My kids are all grown up. My youngest is now 23. They're all married, gone. I've gone through every stage. But one of my daughters had 23 friends. None of them but Michelle and I were married, and married a couple that are married the whole time. They were broken families or remarried. And there was a girl in there, Jay, from a rough background. She came along to a couple of camps that we were running, and in year 12, they were sorting out their graduation, and Jay gets up and says, I can't do it in September. I've got a camp that I go on in September and I can't not go to that. And Jessica said to her, Jade, what the heck are you talking about? And she said, that is the only place in my life where I see teenagers loving teenagers, and I am not going to miss that for the world. I think for us, we need to recognise that we as leaders and having kids actually living godly lives is incredibly attractive to the outside world, especially in a world that is so lost. Okay, Psalm 133. Who did I give that for?
Me. Psalm 133. How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down upon the collar of his robes. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion, for there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in there you kind of go, what the heck? But the oil and stuff basically just means how absolutely amazing is this? And so can you just read that again? What is absolutely amazing?
How good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in unity.
There it is. Did you hear it? Everything after that is expressing how freaking believable that is. It's amazing. And so, again, in this situation, in your leadership teams, in your churches, within ourselves, to live in unity, to actually be that connection in Christ that we have, to help that to happen. It's incredibly attractive to people who aren't Christians. Okay, Colossians. Andrew.
Colossians 4, 5 and 6. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person.
Yep, just read it again for us, Andrew.
Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person.
Yep. So what's that telling us about reaching youth for today?
I think it presumes we're going to walk with outsiders. And I'm concerned sometimes Christians just want to, like, there's a bit of a lean towards we don't want to be influenced by the world, so we protect ourselves or we become a huddle away from the world, whereas it's always a matter of influence, isn't it? So we need to be walking with Christ, but we also need to be walking in the midst of the marketplace and the people and be where people are at. And I think that's, and getting to what Brian mentioned earlier, I think that's a bit of our challenge of our day is in a heightened, safe Australia, adults are viewed as, a threat or, to be viewed with skepticism when they're around teenagers. So that's a bit of our, I don't think we have, in the Presbyterian Church, we don't have a proclamation problem. We have a proximity problem to teenagers. We can't get around them, get amongst them, be viewed as positive people. But we got to find ways to walk with outsiders and then to do it with wisdom.
Yeah. So again, Andrew, you are dead on there. That see this group here. This is a walking from the war zone. Where else in these kids' weeks do they get to talk about Jesus and think about how they can actually love people outside? And the reality is there will be parents who are sitting in Christian schools and doing exactly, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but the thing that is wrong is that kids think that everybody's a Christian in a Christian school. That's not a correct assumption at all. And so we need to be preparing our kids to be able to take the opportunities that are out there. But as leaders, I think sometimes we lose sight that God brings people in. And we need to be ready and prepared to love those kids as they come into that space too. But again, Andrew is right, because what we're talking about here is building relationships with teenagers. Now, in this day and age, that's what needs to happen because kids are desperate to have relationship. But because of all the rubbish that has happened with wicked people, we just get lumped in the other category. But for the teenagers, that's not what they think. If we're living godly lives and holding integrity there, I don't know who was talking in your conversation. I heard about what do you say to kids, and someone said they just want to be listened to. This phenomenon in me as I've got older, which is super weird, is that I have teenage girls come and sit next to me at camp and want to have a full-blown conversation about nothing much at all. And I've just come to realise that they just don't have a significant older male in their life. And they just want someone older that's a male to listen to them. And I'm a terrible listener, and it is super weird for me, but it just highlights the desperate need that this relationship stuff has to happen. And we're in this awkward position as church and leaders to hold ourselves integrity high so that Jesus isn't actually pulled down, but we don't stop doing it. So we need to think through how to do that. So, for example, I would have conversations with some teenagers in a church, sitting in a pew with 100 people around me. That might be a really serious conversation between them and me. That in our youth groups, we've always got kids around us, but this group, you're actually pulling together and having good, serious conversations to build relationships. But as far as reaching outsiders, that if you've got 2 or 3 kids that actually become Christians, with my experience, I've seen youth groups have 4 kids that have grown to 25 kids in 2 years because those 4 kids were Christians and someone actually taught them how to share the gospel. And so that leader has to be prepared for the kids coming in and actually bringing more leaders in. The thing that is missing from this is we would put a trainee leader in here that when this group actually grew, we'd split the group and create another group. And I can tell you, none of those kids wanted that to happen. But when it did happen, and it was just give it 3 months, we used to say, they'd pull away and they go, actually, it is better because we get to talk to our leader more. There's not so many people there. Now, I know some of you may not be in that position, I certainly wasn't for a long time too in a number of cases, but it is glorious to see that going on. Okay, next one, Ephesians.
Ephesians 4:11-12.
Oh, sorry, Phil. Can I just say in the last one too, take every opportunity, but it also said be prepared. And I think that as leaders, for us to actually think through how to have good conversations about different things, gender, same-sex attraction, stuff that's going on, I think it's important that we have good conversations as Christians, that we're loving people in that, not just condemning people, but also just that, like, again, Mike talked about, there's phases, but the Bible speaks into all of those areas if you're just teaching them. But as leaders, we need to be thinking through how we help different situations to happen, bullying, actually popularity, sleeping with different people or whatever, how we deal with that. We need to actually think how to do that and take the opportunity to love people and point them to Jesus. Because I think as a Presby church, certainly, I don't know about you guys, but in Queensland, we can be caught out being very judgmental and not very loving. If a kid falls away or is doing something wrong, they're pushed aside. So a girl shows up at youth group. This girl's been praying for her friend to come to youth group for 6 months. She shows up and comes into youth group here, and she comes like she would if she was going out, dressed for success, boob tube, miniskirt. None of the girls talked to her. That friend was devastated. And the girl praying for her, she came to me and was so sad. I've been praying for her. She's here. Everyone judged her and wrote her off. And what happened there? There's a learn moment there from that leader to say, she needs Jesus just like you did. And you've forgotten how desperately you need Jesus. That's broad gospel there. Preaching the gospel to remember how deeply we need the gospel so that we can see how desperately other people need the gospel. Okay. Next one.
Ephesians 4:11-12. And he, Christ, gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ. And he, Christ, gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ.
I'm not going to let you guess this one. I'm just going to tell you for the sake of time. But I think there's one thing that as a church we often forget, and that is God gifts evangelists. And we need to identify who those evangelists are. And they're usually annoying. They're usually the people who are brash and tell people about Jesus at the drop of a hat. And we go, oh, man, they're crazy. But they need to be invited to every party we have. They need to be encouraged to actually share their faith at any opportunity, and we need to recognise the gift that's there. Liz Dearness in my youth group, so I sat with her behind me at a thing that we had on. Within 10 minutes, she was having a full-blown conversation about Jesus. She taught me how to get into those conversations. Zach, same deal, much more brash, but incredible how they can do that. And so I would encourage you to look for the evangelists in our churches. They are there. God has placed them in our church, and they're often people who are either quiet, going about their role, or brash and we push aside. But we need to actually grab hold of them and care about them. Now, the last one, which is the Acts 2. This is the first fellowship of believers. This is one of my favourite passages. But look at how this church is functioning. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So what's the apostles' teaching for us today? It's the Bible, yeah? The teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayer. That they were hearing from God, they were encouraging each other, and they were speaking to God. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and signs were performed by the apostles. Now, the reality is you're probably not going to have a whole bunch of signs and wonders happening in your youth group. But again, that's why we have the Bible. That's why it's written down, so we know that it's true. God doesn't hide anything from us. He wants us to know it's true. And he wants these teenagers to know that too. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They didn't just all wear miniskirts and have blonde hair. The thing in common was Christ. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They cared about each other. They were generous to each other. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They did life together, praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people. Now, that is a snapshot of what youth groups should be like. That is what we should be aiming for. And then the last line in verse 47 of Acts 2, this is what it says: praising God and enjoying the favour of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This again, we lose sight of how attractive it is to outsiders to be Christian. There's a whole bunch of people that are going to beat us up and give us a hard time, but we're so busy trying to think about what we should do, we completely miss the thing that God has given to us, and that's our relationship with him and living it out, trusting him in that. And so if we're going to reach young people, well, if you don't hear anything, I've said this a few times today, and you don't hear anything else, okay? Tip 1, build relationships with the teenagers that are there. Teach the Bible into those relationships and apply the Bible in those relationships. Because you can teach the Bible and all you'll get is a whole bunch of knowledge that'll never get to a teenager's heart. Doesn't work. They'll go to hell because of that. There's probably people sitting in our churches exactly like that. We can build relationships, have the best relationships in the world, but if we don't teach the Bible into that, they're going to hell. We need to build relationships so that we can teach the Bible into those relationships, but we need to help apply the Bible through knowing where those kids are at, because that is when the Bible comes alive. Teenage boys love to be challenged. Girls love to know how to the answer to how to live stuff out, even if it's tough. And that's what God does for us. He doesn't hide anything. Secondly, be unashamedly and intentionally Christian. Do not stray away from it. It is the most attractive thing you can do to actually draw young people into your ministry. Unashamedly, intentionally Christian. So in other words, you want your kids to go, come along the youth group. We learn about God here. You don't want them to come along to youth group where you're going to have fun games and it'll be awesome. You want them to get to them to a point. Come and hear about Jesus. And don't get confused too. I know a whole bunch of teenage girls a while ago went out and said, what did you do on the weekend? They said, oh, we sat around and watched movies. I said, did you have a good time? It was fantastic. So what, you watch movies nonstop? Like when you dig down to that, it's the relationship that they're enjoying. And youth group, don't get confused here that it's not your fun games that are going on. You should actually be using those fun games and stuff to build relationship, change what's going on. So on camps, we're doing skiing on the side of the dam. And we say to the leaders, this is an amazing opportunity to build relationships. Let's be intentional about this. And so we just plonk ourselves down, start conversations. And, oh, what about what we were talking in the Bible study the other day? What did you think about that? Blah, 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 blah. And intentionally have those conversations. And so that time that we're having fun skiing, it becomes this time that we're actually building relationships. When you go 10-pin bowling or doing an activity, you want to start wiring and changing the culture. We're doing this to talk to each other, to love each other, because it doesn't, like for a teenager, seriously, it doesn't matter what they're doing. If the relationship's good, they're having the best time in their life. In other words, a teenager will go to a bad football match with their mates because of the relationship rather than a fantastic football match with people that they don't like. Full stop. So don't lose sight of how important it is to be unashamedly, intentionally Christian, because Jesus is the reason he came is to renew our relationship with God so that we can have good relationships. Okay? Fourthly, don't forget, always ask the question, why do we do what we do? And fifthly, create a flow. You are taking kids out of youth group and they'll stop at youth group. You don't want them to drop out. Create a flow into young adult or adulthood. You need to be thinking that through, because otherwise you're letting those kids down. Mike brought that up in there too. And just to finish up, and I think I'm nearly out of time, but I don't know whether we've got enough time for some questions. But as a leader, be a leader. You are the leader. So they're expecting you to talk about Jesus. Talk about Jesus. They're not going to be surprised by that at all. And you need to actually see if there's things aren't going very well in your group, or the first place you need to look is yourself. Are you the problem? I've seen leaders come out and say, "Oh, it's terrible tonight. It didn't go very well." And I go, "How are you going tonight?" "Oh, I had a hard week. It was terrible." And it's a little bit like Rivet Youth Group, had a tough week. Suck it up, princess. We're going to have the best night out. And I can nearly guarantee if you do that, you'll have the best night out. When kids are all mucking up in the Bible study and carrying on, don't just let it roll on. Just go, "Stop. What are you guys doing? Like, where else in your week do you get to hear from God? Isn't this free? It's amazing. And you blokes are mucking around. Stop that. Let's get on with this." And then change the thing. Okay, let's do it. Like, you can get angry and get into kids and then move back to, "We're going to have a good time," really quickly. They'll come with you easily with that. You just need to recognize you are leading, so lead. Now, I don't mean lauding, I mean leading. And so, which leads to the next point of follow the leader. I remember one time my year 10s group was sitting at the back of church. I'm chatting to someone, and all my boys are sitting next to me at the back of church. There was 9 in my group. And one of the elders walks up to me, and as he goes past, he says, "Oh my goodness, there's 9 Dave Hoppers in this church." And I looked down, and they were all carrying on stupid like I was. And I thought to myself, they don't always pick up the best things about you either. And so, like, as leaders, don't be surprised. They are actually looking at you and following you. And so, follow me as I follow Christ. That's what you should be aiming for. And finally, this will show my age, but the song of Cat Stevens, "The Cat's in the Cradle," the Silver Spoon, I think that is true of youth ministry. That, and if you haven't heard it, I'm sorry for you younger dudes there, but go and listen to it and broaden your horizons. But it's basically about a father who has a kid who's always busy, and then he grows up and retires, and his kid's always busy. And there's just a line in there that says, "My kid has become just like me." And so make sure that we as leaders are like Jesus. Right. There was an hour thing that should have probably taken 2 hours with a whole bunch more conversation. So I'm really sorry about that.
Dave, well done. I feel like, when you can speed up with the little rabbit icon on different technology, you can, we've put you on fast forward a little bit today. Appreciate
that was time and a half.
The energy you put in. You've made it work. Well done. Thank you. Folks, can we do some questions? Can we all agree that we can just extend a few minutes and get some questions in?
I am happy if people want to go, they can go. But if people have got questions, I can hang around here for another while.
So just let me say, if you want to go, that's fine. You know that's the schedule, and that's when we said we'd finish. Just so you know, Victoria, we planned on finishing and having an earlier day. The rest of Australia is kicking on longer. They're having team times there, and there's a final session. Victoria, if you do want to catch that final session, all you need to do later on is at 5:00, go into that stream link that you have done all day, and you can catch Mike's. I think it's a recording because he should be asleep by now, American time, right? So you'll get to catch the tail end of it, the wrap up and all of the stuff there. So if you want to, that'll be there, but that's on you to check out. But we'll just let Dave answer some questions and then we'll be done. That's the plan. But if you need to leave at this point, you're not offending anyone if that's the case.
Dave, I saw you just took a photo of your screen. Before people sign off, Andrew wanted to take a photo of all of us, a screenshot. If you don't want to be in the screenshot, turn your camera off.
What kind of expression would you like, Anne?
Preferably if you had a costume or something, Brian. That would be really good if you just pop something on real quick. I think just a smile would be fine. Oh, that'll be nice. Yeah, with the cat. Andrew, do you want to take the screenshot? Can you give us a 1, 2, 3?
Small tickles.
All right. 1, 2, 3. All right. Looks good, folks. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dave. I've got to go. Thank you, Andrew. This is great. I look forward to more of them.
Bye, Brian. Bye, Tickles.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Thanks for
Yeah.
joining.
All righty. So let's keep rolling. Those that can. Any questions for Dave?
Okay, that's it. Let's go. I'm okay if there's no.
Maybe I shouldn't have given them the option. Just kept them.
One.
Go, Sarah.
So I'm not leading youth necessarily in action at the moment. And I was a far younger Christian in my walk when I was leading a youth group. But it was very interesting hearing you talk about where you came from, because we certainly only had a youth group of a couple of kids who came to church. They'd known each other for forever. And we didn't have a lot of growth, but we were also really proud of what we did have going on, because it was being small, we were able to get into some more nitty-gritty stuff. I guess my question more is around leadership, because that's where I've been focused in other spheres of life, around learning to be a leader and do more work on what it looks like to be a leader. Do you have any recommendations on Christian material? Because there's so much out there. There's so much, leadership 101, this, that, and the other. But when it comes to, leading youth well, leading Christian groups well, have you come across anything that's particularly noteworthy?
Sarah, I'm going to answer this probably not how you want me to, okay? But I would encourage you to actually see these people on the screen? Get some phone numbers. Like I can put you in touch with a whole bunch of leaders, because the thing that we have found that is the most helpful for leadership development is to actually connect with other leaders. Because you'll be like you talk about having a couple of kids at Stanthorpe, which is down on the border of Queensland. They had 4 girls. We were running Dalby Presbyterian was running a camp across the other side, and they had 50 or 60 in their youth group. They went across there with their leaders, and the encouragement that leaders got from leaders was incredibly helpful. And not only that, the kids from Dalby looked at this little youth group and went, man, we are so fortunate to have all the leaders we have. Kids within the Stanthorpe went, holy heck, we could be a whole bunch bigger if we just shared our faith with people. Another example, a girl came down from Mackay to a conference that we ran. I put her in with Willow's team. We had 20 leaders in it, and she was the only leader. I hooked her up with the girls in my leadership team. They continued to bring her and encourage her and think something. She would be thinking about material, having trouble with discipline. We talked to those girls, and that youth group grew from 5 kids to 25, like a year later, 25 kids that I didn't have anything to do with. But so I'm not really helping you there. There are lots of leadership material. I agree with that.
No, you are helping. I'm very involved with PY New South Wales summer camp.
Yeah.
And so it's just another reason why people need to go to that. I mean, I've loved it for the last 16 years. Believe in it a lot. It doesn't necessarily have wide support if you ask the assembly. But the kids and the people who go to it, they love it. They absolutely love it. And it's for these reasons.
I know that Dave down there is trying to put leaders together in a room and get to talk to each other, get involved and be a part of it, because you've already got experience. The thing that blows me away is everybody has had experience, and those conversations are the thing that make the difference. Look, I would read the Ken Moser books that I can't remember their names right now. So there's
these ones, Changing the World, or
Changing the World,
and then number 2, and then
so Changing the World number 1 is probably a good thing to actually start to think through what you're doing, and then Changing the World 2 is more a practical one, and the evangelism one, I really like that because it actually puts into perspective of evangelism is a scary thing for most people. and to actually, like what we've been doing, helping kids to come bold, to see the opportunity to share their faith. It's so nice to see kids come back in and they go, did you have any opportunities to share your faith? And they go, yep, completely stuffed it up. And to be able to talk that through and pray for and go, okay, let's have another crack at going and doing that and praying for their friends and stuff. Well, I've seen growth just purely from people encouraging each other. I don't know, Andrew, have you got books that you like that you'll have hundreds?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Dave, in terms of a lot of what's stuck has been through experience. So it's, it's the senior ministers I've served alongside, watching them. It's the young life people that I've had a lot to do with that have influenced me. I mean, there are some key books. I mean, a lot of them for me, I'm going to share. They would be from the American context, and I'm not sure if there's just too much work to adapt some of that.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting with Mike because I think his context is a lot more like Australian context, but I think when you head south, my experience with south is a lot different to Australia. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't lose. Like you talked about winter camp or summer camp there. I think the challenge is to find guys that are actually trying to do youth ministry in local churches and start having that conversation. Because running a camp, in my opinion, should be a part of growing youth ministry in small churches. It shouldn't be the youth ministry. That's how I kind of grew up. I went on camps, and it's like you go on camp and you go, yeah, I'm serious for Jesus, and then you just crash out. Whereas what you actually want to do is each week you're building a relationship and they're growing in their faith. And you go on camp and it's like 50 camps in a row, and then they continue on in their faith. Whereas, that was definitely Queensland. Kids were going, yeah, they become a Christian every year. And just go up and down like this and you go, hang on, what's going on? Andrew, you got something there?
Sarah, one book I highly recommend. I don't know if it's going to come out there.
It wants to blur it.
It's blurring it. Oh, there.
Alongside.
I'll have to put the title in the thing. It's called Alongside. It's by the same publisher that Mike has used for one of his books. It's called Alongside: Loving Teenagers with the Gospel by a guy called Drew Hill. And I think there would be some similarities to what is being shared today in terms of an emphasis on the gospel flowing through relationships and the importance of having that bridge of friendship and the Christian witness and the impact of that on young people. And that we often just think in programs and events, but really we need to lean into, and especially coming off COVID, I think, less programmatic, more relational, more simple. It's going to win the day, I think. They're so hungry for meaning right now. You don't need that big need talk anymore. You don't need to cultivate a great need in teenagers right now. They're feeling it and they're responsive and they need us, and we just got to get on with it, huh? So I'll write that title in the chat for you.
Mike McGarry's book is probably worth a read too, obviously. And I'm not just promoting that. It's one of the reasons that we asked him to speak.